Welcome to another edition of the Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and on this series of programs, we examine most of all the human condition, the conditions under which Guyanese live. And it's a message that we send both to Guyanese at home and in the diaspora. And what is more important at this time of the year than the cost of food? And the big question is, why is food so costly? One newspaper actually runs a weekly column on the costliness of food. And we've been talking for decades about being the breadbasket, but food prices are really skyrocketing. What is the matter? Is Guyana already suffering from this Dutch disease in which the petroleum sector is sucking the oxygen out of the agriculture sector? All of the investments are going to foreigners who come in the country, and the daily food that people need, sweet potato and tomatoes and cassava and plantain, are all these commodities becoming out of reach of the ordinary man. It is cheaper now to buy an imported apple than a local mango. And sometimes people hold these food fairs and so on. But when you go to them, they're selling Brazilian tomatoes and Guatemalan cabbage and so on. Something is definitely wrong, and many ordinary Guyanese are finding it difficult or sometimes impossible to put enough food, appropriate food, nutritious food on the table for their families. Just look at what's happening. A loaf of bread, 600-gram loaf of bread, what they call a family loaf, is $420. A kilo of cabbage, $1,000. A kilo of cassava, $460. A liter of cooking oil, $1,200. A tray of eggs, over $1,000. A kilo of fish, $500. A kilo of flour, $250. A kilo of mangoes, $1,000. A liter of milk, $800. A kilo of plantains, $500. A kilo of rice, $380. A kilo of sugar, $360. Sweet potatoes, $420 a kilo. Tomatoes, $1,400 a kilo. And even water. Water is more expensive than gasoline now. Um, for a family of five, a mother, a housewife, a single parent would have to fork out $115,000 every month just for food. I'm not talking about transportation, minibus fares. I'm not talking about clothing. I'm not talking about entertainment. I'm talking about food. $115,000 to feed a family of five. Something is wrong, especially when you know that the minimum wage of the average public servant is just about $76,000. It means that if the money is to be spent on essentials, they pay their rent and they pay transportation. And it means they'll be eating poor and poorer food or less food, maybe sometimes just once a day. So there is a problem in Guyana, and that is the context within which we have to examine the high cost of food. About 43% of our population is still poor. Poor in a way that they are spending less than $1,000 a day on food. And this is based on international analysis. Food costs are soaring. But in this country now, don't forget that in December 2019, before I demitted office, I declared Guyana to be a petroleum state. This year alone, 2023, the PPPC administration has already withdrawn $176 billion from the natural resources. This is not a laughing matter. Its money is spent. Where is it going? I can tell you where is it going because the Auditor General himself admitted that so much money had been given to the Ministry of Public Works that last year, 2022, $13 billion was left unspent. So the Ministry of Public Works got more money than it needed. And we are not getting that money to augment, to increase food production. So the Natural Resource Fund is cushioning government expenditure, but the government is not cushioning the high cost of food. And once food is expensive, It affects the lives of the aged. It affects the lives of single parent households. It affects the lives of hinterland and rural residents. It affects the lives of the poor. It affects the lives of the sick and the unemployed. These are the people who need access to adequate and affordable food, but they are the people who are least able to afford it. And I speak particularly of people in villages and the hinterland villages. There are over 200 indigenous villages, but they end up spending more for food than the coastlanders because a lot of the food, especially canned stuff or food they don't produce, has to be flown in. And there are no good roads in the hinterland. The roads are going in East Berbice Quarantine. They're going in Region 5. That's where the roads are going. And many people in Region 8 don't have good roads. People in Region 9 don't have good roads. People in Region 1 don't have good roads. But the food costs are soaring for them as well. So it is not a problem that can be solved with hampers and handouts. This is a problem that has to be solved by changes in policy. And the PPP must become more aware of what is happening on the ground. They seem to be living in a bubble. Why is food so costly? Okay, we all understand that the COVID pandemic prevented a lot of people from working, prevented, food from being produced in sufficient quantities. And there was a crisis, but the COVID pandemic is over. And the APNU AFC administration did make some provision to deal with the difficulties posed by COVID pandemic. There were production shortfalls, there were distribution disruptions, but we'll come to that in a minute. Why food costs are increasing? Because the PPPC has a misplaced framework of priorities. And they're trying to deal with those priorities with $25,000 grants and state old age pension, what they call the SOAP, the SOAP, of 33,000. Well, a pensioner cannot survive on that, even if he's getting some other pensions from NIS and so on. That is not enough to keep a person who needs additional food, additional medication in a healthy state. The PPP's imposition recently announced of an across-the-board grant or increase in wages and salaries of 6.5% without negotiating with the unions, without the unions getting an opportunity to say what the workers need, is not going to solve the problem. But inflation is 16%. What is the point giving people 6% when you know the problem is 16%? So you can see there's a shortfall from the outset. So there's nothing to celebrate in the attitude that the PPP has adopted. And those minor changes, minuscule changes of a 6% here and a hamper there and a handout there will not improve the lives of ordinary people, and it will not bring down the cost of food. Despite the fact that Guyana claims to have one of the fastest growing economies in the Western Hemisphere, if not the whole world. People project that this year the growth rate is going to be 25%, but it doesn't mean that food prices will come down 25%. That is the problem. When we look at the region, when you look at Guyana's place in the region, and when you look at the place of the villages and the farming areas of Guyana, let us put them in perspective. CARICOM has done a tremendous amount of spade work, and many Guyanese do not realize that a lot of that work has been ignored. The CARICOM Common Agricultural Policy is basically the pillar of food production in the Caribbean. It defines agriculture policy. From 1989, the Grandand's Declaration, 1989, you can imagine the length of time you're talking about. That was promulgated. Lilienthal Declaration, Regional Food and Nutrition Security Policy. CARICOM Regional Dialogue on Food Systems, Caribbean COVID Security Policy and Livelihood Impact Survey, Regional Summary Report of on food production. And of course, then you started getting into the slogans. Vision 25 by 20, Vision 25 by 2025, aiming at reducing the region's food import bill by 25% by 2025. So you can see that this is pie in the sky. Because of a lack of political will, these programs, which are well researched, well presented, accepted by Caribbean heads, have not been fulfilled. They're being set aside. Why are they being set aside? Especially when it is clear that people are going hungry. The PPP cannot be faulted for its spectacular and dramatic presentation, almost theatrical over the last 40 months. The government attended the CELAC summit, promised to provide strong leadership on food security, promised to establish a voluntary fund to facilitate regional disaster response, promised to open lands for intra-regional agricultural investment, and to implement a business-to-business platform, B2B, and to implement a government-to-government portal, G2G. You can't fault the PPP for slogans. But what do these things mean? What has happened to the voluntary fund, for disaster response? What has happened to the B2B platform and the G2G platform? Then, of course, United Nations came to the rescue. There was the United Nations Food Systems Summit in 2021, and the government of Guyana promised to transform food production system involving the regional private sector. Has it happened? Then we had the CARICOM meeting of head of government, which promised to work to dismantle barriers to interregional trade. Have the barriers been dismantled? My friends, people have been talking about dismantling those barriers for the last quarter century, frankly. Then we had, other interventions like the CELAC meeting of ministers of foreign affairs, promised to make regional food security and production a priority. Is regional food production a priority? Then we had the Bridgetown Agri-Fest in 2022, which promised to make lands available for youth to farm. Well, how many hectares of land have been made available for youth to farm? And then we had the Agri-Investment Forum and Expo in 2022 and 2023, promising to lead in reducing CARICOM food import bill. Ask yourselves the question, where have all of these conferences and meetings and proposals and slogans and exhibitions and led to? Have they brought down the price of sweet potato? Have they brought down the price of tomato? Have they brought down the price of chicken? You answer. And you will see that we, as a whole, the people of Guyana are not being provided with solutions to the food crisis. Food costs are rising. Why? Because there is not enough food. Enough food is not being produced because we don't have the capability as agro-processors and food exporters, because the policies for local small-scale food production are inappropriate, because we need these policies to insulate economies from shocks and stresses caused by global food shortages and the strain of migrant overflow. Don't forget that by any means, we're talking about between 25 to 40,000 new mouths to feed. And these migrants are not being put on agricultural land. These migrants are being fed by the state. It means that even a little that we had is now being shared among a larger population. And we also have to face a situation in which food prices are continuing to rise because The PPP administration has decided, has determined to ignore everything that the APNU AFC coalition attempted to do, especially our grassroots project, because our projects were aimed at the grassroots. We were not talking about big mega projects bringing in Abu Dhabi and Dubai and all these foreign investors. APNU AFC aimed to feed the people where they lived in the hinterland, in Region 1, Region 7, Region 8, Region 9, in the villages, in the neighborhoods. That's where our focus was. We even appointed a minister of rural affairs in order to accelerate local food production. Yes, we didn't bring in big investors because when these investors come, what do they want? They're looking for roads. They're looking for ships. They're looking for aircraft. They're looking for arable lands. And you can't bring in a large number of foreign investors and there are no good roads to get to the farms or to get their crops out. These people are not stupid. These people are not throwing away money. These people want to invest if they can extract profits. And we don't even have the infrastructure. So by the PPP's attitude of destroying everything that the APNU AFC coalition had created, remove the Minister of Rural Affairs, and the projects that we had established to promote village farming, to promote agro processing, and to reduce food prices were all washed away. So the PPP's negative attitude has demolished the projects, damaged village economies, which are now more dependent on imported food. When you go into the villages, instead of local tomatoes, you're getting Brazilian tomatoes. And production was decreased because production is being swamped by foreign produce, foreign carrots, foreign cabbages, foreign tomatoes, that's foreign apples. That is what is happening. And the government knows what is happening. But the big trading companies are profiting. The trading companies are not profiting by local produce. They're profiting by importing and getting a markup. And that is the problem facing ordinary families, ordinary households who cannot afford to pay the price of imported foods. And they're seeing diminishing local food production and increasing imports. So when they go to the market, what do they see? Foreign carrots, foreign apples, and they're not seeing produce that they want to eat on a day-to-day basis, sweet potatoes, plantains, and cassava. We established plans of action for regional development. We didn't just share out money to the regions. The regions, even PPP-controlled regions, participated in designing plans which were meaningful to those regions. One cap doesn't fit all. Every region is not the same. Some regions may be strong in producing nuts. Some may be strong in producing fruits. Some may be strong in producing vegetables. And each region was able to design its own PARD, Plan of Action for Regional Development. There was also the RACE, the Regional Agriculture and Commercial Exhibition. Even PPP chairmen were eager to participate in the Regional Agriculture and Commercial Exhibition because it helped regional production. It helped to bring the farmers and agro processors to one place to sell their commodities. But they've done away with the RAC. It's an APNU invention, so it's gone. We had the Regional Agriculture Infrastructure Development Project, the REID, and that too was gone because it fostered the development of infrastructure in the agricultural areas. And some of those agricultural areas need roads to entry and exit roads because when you produce something in your farm, you have to get it out to the market. When there's heavy rainfall, when there's heavy flooding, you need to have flood relief. When there's a drought, you need to have irrigation. And unless you have an REID, a Regional Agriculture Infrastructure Development Project, our villages will continue to suffer. Then we had the READ, the Rural Enterprise and Agricultural Development Project, which empowered rural households, and the REAP, and this was introduced at the time of COVID. The APNU was responsive to the needs of the people, especially during the COVID catastrophe. And the REAP, Regional Entrepreneurial Agriculture Project, aimed at ensuring household self-sufficiency. So our projects, agree, were not mega projects, they were micro projects aimed at human beings, aimed at neighborhoods, aimed at villages, and aimed at families. My friends, this is where we are. We have a government which has disregarded, which has disparaged everything good that has gone before, which has even ignored the tremendous work that the CARICOM Secretariat has done. That is where the expertise is. That is where we've got, persons who research projects and give the best advice. So every year, twice a year, we have heads of government who meet and speak about the same thing over and over again for 30 years. And when it comes down to the situation in our own country, we're growing roses. We're growing wheat and sorghum and soybeans. We're growing millet. We're growing hemp. Now, who eats millet in Guyana? Who eats soybeans in Guyana? Yes, these are important, maybe for stock feed. But what we need are products which can be put on the table tonight, tomorrow, next week, next month, and families could be well fed and healthy. So what we see is that the PPP's food policy is misdirected. It is not as though we ran out of land. It is not as though we ran out of manpower. It's not as though they're not hungry people in Guyana. The food policy is misdirected. We have abundant research, abundant evidence, particularly from CARICOM, and we have knowledge. We have people who need the food. But the PPP seem bent on regressive measures. They're spending billions to bail out a sickly sugar industry. And they're spending billions on vanity projects, hemp, millet, roses, soybean, and wheat. I'm quite confident that if you examine all the recommendations which have been made over the last 3 decades, there's no recommendation that roses are going to produce a food breakthrough. Why spend billions on growing roses at this time? Maybe later on, when we want to beautify the sidewalk. But right now, we're talking about food. We want progressive programs that grow real food to feed the hungry masses. That's what we want. Because people are hungry, children are hungry, children are malnourished. But what we get is a diet of buzzwords, a diet of slogans. We talk about fictional food hubs. Every time you want something, we're going to set up a food hub. But in fact, we end up becoming hubs for importation of Brazilian and Central American food. We're not talking food hubs for producing and marketing Guyanese commodities. The PPP administration needs to consider investment. If we are to achieve this target of 25 by 25, or whatever it is, we need to get 7.5 billion, $7.5 billion in 2025 or by 2025. But at the same time, the Auditor General, as I said earlier, the Auditor General has reported that in 2022, $13 billion allocated for public works remained unspent. So it's a case of the grass is growing and the horse is starving. The money is there. So much money is given to the Ministry of Public Works that they can't even spend it. But instead of spending the money on producing sweet potatoes and cabbage and tomatoes, the money goes back to the treasury. This is oil money. That is what is happening. I didn't make up these figures. You check the news, check what the other journalists are saying. The support systems, which are essential for success, are absent. Investment in drainage and irrigation, farm to market roads. Look at where the roads are going. The roads are not going into the farming areas. The roads are going beautifying areas which already have roads. They're being resurfaced. And in fact, the farmers are not any better off. So this is what is happening in terms of the absence or the misdirection of investment. The other problem, of course, is infrastructure. As I said a minute ago, the farm to market roads are important, not only on the coast, but also in the hinterland. My friends, we cannot develop this country, we cannot develop um, agriculture, we cannot improve food production in the hinterland without better roads. Region 8, Patara Superuni, is notorious. Every year there's a safari to go from east to west in the Patara Separuni. There are no proper roads, and that area has rich valleys. Instead of producing the best quality marijuana, they should be producing the best potatoes and tomatoes. But there are no roads. The roads are going in Region 6 and elsewhere. That is the problem. It's misplaced priorities. So we need proper highway system for the encouragement of food production. We need proper irrigation system um, to prevent the flooding of farms during rainy weather. We need transportation systems to prevent the deterioration of goods and losses from farm to table. Sometimes you go by selling, you see piles of plantains, piles of pumpkins, but there is no boat to get them to the market. There are no roads to get them to the market, and they spoil. And of course, the packaging is so bad that the goods at the bottom get crushed. So by the time you're ready to move them, they're unusable. They're overripe and rotten. So these are the problems that we need to deal with in our infrastructure. When foreign countries come into your country, they are looking at infrastructure. They want to know they can drive into the farms, they can fly into the farms and get their produce out. They're here to make profits. They're not part of some international welfare consortium. They're here to make profits. And they're not going to put on roads. They're not going to put on highways. They're not going to bring in ships and build stellings. They want to come in and see those facilities, that infrastructural framework created by the government, the host government. And they want to be able to store their commodities. They want to be able to transport their commodities, refrigerate their economy, their commodities, their goods. And these things have got to be in place before they invest a single dollar in food production in Guyana. And we have a lot of ideas, but we're not making deals. We have a lot of ideas, but we're not making deals because the infrastructure is simply not there. And in the final analysis, we need to we need to increase food production. We need to increase food processing. We have the best advice from IDB funded Agricultural Export Diversification Program. It is now expired. It was introduced in 2017 and after 2014 it's gone. It was aimed at building packaging facilities. This is commonsensical. Our coalition tried to revive the packaging facilities at Parika. It was ignored. It was like a cemetery. Nothing was happening there. The United Nations International Year of Fruits and Vegetables, the very thing I'm speaking about, getting more mangoes onto the market. There was actually an International Year of Fruits and Vegetables in 2021, which opened opportunities to inject fruit into the national diet. Children going to school should be able to carry a mango or a sapodilla, Sometimes you see American movies, a child carrying an apple for the teacher. We can't carry a mango because a mango costs $500. And we need to accelerate agro processing so we can stop importing all of these plantain chips and all that. I mean, the former president once ridiculed me for recommending, agro processing. He said, "Oh, Granger wants to have a plantain chip economy." Well, we are buying plantain chips from Guatemala and Jamaica instead of producing plantain chips which our grandmother used to make here in Ghana. That's what comes with that arrogant attitude of people who cannot understand the importance of local agricultural production. What we have arrived at, the position we have arrived at, is that the high cost of food is attributable to the PPP's administration over the last 40 months, spending their energies on billboards and conferences and exhibitions and declarations and slogans. It is time we make a change. The new year and this aim of becoming more self-sufficient in food in 2025 require change in attitude, a change in mindset, if we are to improve and increase food production and reduce the cost of food to the housewife, to the mother, to the family of 5. We have become a petroleum state, but we mustn't become sick or drunk with oil. We must not suffer from that Dutch disease. We should take steps to ensure that we have a well-fed population, and we can achieve this with people-centered policies. Hampers and handouts are not going to cut it. They cannot feed a hungry population. Hampers and handouts cannot nourish a healthy next generation. We need a change in our food policy, and the PPP has to change its attitude and feed this population, bring down the cost of food, and put cheap food on the table of our housewives and mothers. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Let us cooperate for the young. Let us cooperate for our land. Let us resolve to fight together. See we do it right together. Can we do it? Yes, we can.
Each man must